what kind of stuff is cooking up, because yeah, you might have one player who is playing in some tournament that week and still just use a completely different team to throw their opponent off. So we start off with Rahim Farzan having a lot of solid finishes in this year. Turn special event, Utrecht special, and Bochum regionals, going 6-3 at all of them. So a lot of consistency. And we see a really cool team with a lot of offense. Like we see Lander with the Choice Scarf, Urshu Dark with the Choice Band, and the Ogre Pawn that we've been talking about all this weekend with the Fire Hearth Flame Mask. Anything else pop out to you?
I think really this team, like you had mentioned before, just screams a lot of offense, even with things like the Urshifu Dark, which is inherently more of a big button, similar to that Ivy Cudgel, where just this large critical hit move in with something like the Choice Band and the Terra Dark, you're allowed to just dish out lots of strong dark damage into the field, as well as something like that Rock type Landorus, Rock Terrestrialization type Landorus with Rock Slide and Stone Edge over something like that Terra Blast Flying that we normally see.
Yeah, wow, I didn't even notice the Rock Terra and even the Stone Edge on there, so a lot of scary moves coming out from that Landorus. So definitely less conventional, not having the Terra Blast that we commonly see. So yeah, this is sure to be a more of a hyper-offensive strategy coming out from Rahim. And yeah, I'm curious to see how Bruno might react to that. It's worth noting that this Tortoise also has Sunny Day, which makes sense on this team, having two really strong Fire-type Pokemon, but kind of contradicts the recent trend that we've seen with the Rain Dance, also holding the Mental Herb rather than the Covert Cloak or the Focus Sash that we typically see.
Yeah, absolutely. And having access to something like the Protect on this, I think, is super valuable, especially in something like the Mirror, where you're able to get that Protect and prevent any damage from like an Iron Hands Wild Charge or something like that that could potentially KO your Tornadus. And it's really helpful in stalling out those Tailwind turns and making sure you get that extra turn or two that you may need in the Mirror.
Absolutely. Yeah, if we see any kind of Tailwind Mirror, will be really important to keep track of those Tailwind turns, making sure that you're the one attacking before the others. So maybe we can move on soon to the Bruno's team, seeing how they might match up to Rahim's hyper offense. And we see the Fluttermane, Iron Hands, Ogerpon, Chiyu, Landorus, and Amoonguss. So no Tailwind in sight, but still some pretty scary Pokemon like the Choice Specs Chiyu, having that Ghost Terrestrialization, meaning it has the option to completely bypass Fake Outs. But yeah, what is your first impression looking at this team?
Yeah, so not only like you had mentioned, the Ghost Terrestrialization on that Chiyu to avoid any Fake Outs potentially from that Rillaboom. Something like the Terrafire Amoonguss really sticks out to me with the rise of Fire Ogerpon. Something like the Water Terrestrialization that is usually common on Amoonguss doesn't really cut it anymore, with Ogerpon having amazing coverage in that stab type damage with secondary grass typing from something like a Power Whip or a Wood Hammer or a Grassy Glide, even from Rillaboom. Terrafire, you have a weaker matchup into something like the Water Ogerpon, but with your own and Follow Me, you kind of counteract that. So I really like the option that Bruno went here with that Terrafire to resist something like the Ogerpon Fire, which normally I think into a team like this would do a lot of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Follow Me and the Chiyu, the Follow Me on the Ogerpon and the Chiyu seem to have a really good synergy. We talk about how the Chiyu is could be immune to the Fake Out, so can't even be slowed down by Fake Out. Able to be supported by the Follow Me with the Ogerpon to constantly dish out a lot of damage. So I think Rahim might want to use their Heatran to mitigate the damage there. Maybe forced to lock them into the Dark type move that is usually not as scary as the Heat Waves or the Overheats. But any other aspect of matchup that you kind of note down?
I really think that Rahim is kind of in the driver's seat if they're able to get up in their, as you kind of mentioned before, their Urshifu and their Ogerpon in position, and making sure they support their Heatran well enough so that the Ogerpon doesn't necessarily run away with the game on Bruno's end. I do think the Heatran is going to be a key part in Rahim's game plan, as well as managing that Urshifu damage. But I do believe we actually are ready to jump into game one here and see what both of our players are thinking.
All right, well, let's go ahead and kick it off. It's going to be Portugal versus Germany, Bruno versus Rahim, and we see the Landorus and Heatran come out from Rahim's end, where Bruno sends out their Iron Hands and their Landorus.
So off the here, Intimidate on both sides of the field, I think is great. More favorable, obviously, for the Rahim here, having Heatran not be really affected by the Intimidate, but Landorus getting Intimidate both down into Bruno's Landorus and Iron Hands is really, really good for, as we mentioned before, having that Heatran be in position to take slightly less damage from something like a Drain Punch. But even in the same vein, it's like Stopping Tantrum is still doing a lot of damage and very threatening in a Heatran, so even though it is the Lando and the hands are intimidated, something like a Stopping Tantrum and a Fake Out potentially isn't really something that he wants to take.
Absolutely. Even with Bruno's Pokemon being intimidated, this Heatran does not want to stay here, staying as the Fire and Steel type, so going ahead and kick off the first game with a Terastallization, transferring into the Fairy type, resisting the potential Drain Punch come out from the Iron Hands, as well as taking neutral damage from the Landorus. So we go ahead and see the U-turn coming out from the Landorus on Rahim's end. Pretty safe move, not having to predict the Iron Hands potentially switching out and being able to switch mid-turns after they lock in their moves. So seems like they might be deciding between their Tortoise and their Urshifu.
Yeah, so no Fake Out there from Bruno's end is really interesting to me, opting to just let the Heatran do what it pleases this turn. The Terra Fairy from Rahim's end makes a lot of sense. Well, realizing that you don't really need your Terastallization on anything else, and Heatran is going to be your answer into a lot of these Pokemon on Bruno's end, just getting the Terra out of the way so that you have it. If you have to switch it out and switch it back in, the Terra Fairy is already on the Heatran and you're not switching into something like a Stomping Tantrum. I do really like the Tornado switch there, so you are threatening with something like a Tail, so you do guarantee the faster Lando and things like that, and a big Heat Wave, often an Ogerpon and Hands.
Yep, so Bruno successfully baiting out the Terastallization from Heatran on Rahim's end and finishing the turn with the Head Slam onto the Tornadus. So pretty interesting position where, like you said, the Terastallization was baited out, but in return, Bruno took a lot of damage on both Pokemon.
Yeah, and something like this Tornadus now that it's on the field, is most likely in range of a Wild Charge depending on how it's built. Though it's Mental Herb, it might be a little bit more bulky, even though the Iron Hands is at -1. Still an Iron Hands and does a lot of damage. Something like a Sunny Day here I think is really, really strong for Rahim's, and just boosting up those Heat Wave damages, so even if Bruno does decide to go for something like a Terastallization Water here, which I think we might be expecting, to get that special defense buff, in Sun it's still going to be taking a lot of damage from a Life Orb Heatran.
Absolutely. Bruno respecting the move you just talked about of the Sunny Day and Heat Wave combination. So going to Terastallize, make sure that it starts resisting the fire attacks as well as gain the special defense to tank the hit even better. But we see the the Sunny Day being popped off from the Tornadus and being followed by the Ogerpon going for the Terra Water Ivy Cudgel, which is now taking less damage thanks to the Sun. And the Heatran firing back with the Heat Wave, doing tons of damage to both Pokemon. And this being finished out by Bruno, what I thought would be a knockdown to Tornadus, but thanks to the Intimidate earlier, really paying off dividends, and Tornadus may be able to set up a Tailwind now.
And Bruno learning some crucial information there, knowing that the Tornadus lives that combination of moves that they had gone for, that being the Heavy Slam and the Wild Charge. The Tornadus now is honestly in somewhat of a weird spot. They are actually able to get off a Tailwind, but I think they would have preferred if the Tornadus maybe went down so they could get the Landorus in and go for something like a Rock Slide or just have more immediate damage. But the Tornadus is still not in a bad position per se. You can still go for a Tailwind and a Heat Wave, but I think having a consistent damaging option in case you do miss something like the Heat Wave off of Heatran is preferred for Rahim here.
Absolutely. Well, we see Rahim go straight into Tailwind, wanting to outspeed the opposing Ogerpon with this Heat Wave that connects on both Pokemon. So what you were scared of ended up not panning out for Rahim's luck, and we see a double KO in this turn already. So Bruno down to their last two Pokemon while being up against Tailwind. Let's see how they might come back from this.
And it's really scary. Yes, the Life Orb is shipping down to your Heatran, but with Tailwind, the Sun Boost, Life Orb, and a Heatran staring you down, The fact that Bruno's also used the Terastallization doesn't really bode well, even for something like the Flutter Mane, which will get its Photosynthesis boost in the Sun.
Yep, so we see the Landorus doing the edict first, and then we see the Photosynthesis happen from the Flutter Mane, and I'm not a master of German, so I'm not exactly sure what that showed, but it could be relevant since if there's a speed boost, it could outspeed the Heatran.
Yes,
but
I do believe
like
it is
we
a
have
speed
a speed boost. So this actually changes the game a lot, and especially depending on how this Tortoise is trained in relation to the Flutter Mane. The Flutter Mane might actually be able to get the double knockout this turn. So quite the turn of events.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well what does the dynamics of the Sun boosting the Flutter Mane is, because it did have that boost energy, so it would get it anyways. The fact that the Sun was up and you kind of got it for free now doesn't really impact too much, but it is something to note in something like a Game 2 or Game 3. We are going to see Protect here from the Heatran, though.
Yep, we see the Protect from Heatran wanting to scout out the opposing moves from the Landorus, and I don't think we were able to see what that move was, but we see the Tortoise fire back with the Bleak Wind Storm, lowering the speed from Landorus, which is huge, nullifying that Toy Spark.
Yeah, so as you noticed before, with the Rahim's Tornadus actually being faster than the Flutter Mane there, I believe, unless they locked into something like that Moonblast, which, oh wait, no, it was faster, you were right, and the Tornadus actually had gone before the Landorus, so Flutter Mane, Tornadus, then Landorus.
Yep, so I think luckily for Bruno, the speed drop did not happen on the Flutter Mane, which as of now seems like it could be faster than the Heatran. But the bad news for Bruno is that we have two strong Pokemon coming in from the back. Rahim seems to be pretty confident in how their Urshifu is trained because, the Choice Scarf on Landorus, that is sure to be faster than the Flutter Mane, even with the speed boost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And onto the Flutter Mane, knocking it out, not having access to his Terastallization to defend against it, and we see the Heatran finish off the game for us, thanks to the Landorus having its speed dropped earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even with Terastallization, it most likely, depending on how Bruno had their Flutter Mane trained, Choice Band Wicked Blow from an Urshifu does a lot of damage. Yeah, absolutely, and we'll see exactly what Bruno and Rahim's minds are at in this game too as we jump in.
Yep, so we see Bruno come out with the Iron Hands and Amoonguss, and while Rahim comes out with the Landorus and the Heatran. So we see Rahim is sticking to their leads, knowing what works, while Bruno makes a huge adaptation.
Yeah, and I really do like this adaptation from Bruno, as you mentioned before. Realizing that the Lando and Heatran can't really necessarily stop Fake Out Spore, the Heatran can go for Protect. If Bruno does decide to go for something like a Fake Out and a Spore into the Landorus, you're already behind on turn 1. The Amoonguss adjustment, having access to that Terastallization Fire, I think really has the opportunity to put Bruno in the driver's seat very early on with a good Spore.
Yep, and especially with Rahim's Landorus not having access to the Terra Blast means it can not do that much damage to the Amoonguss, so able to get this safely without having to do any kind of Terastallization, and yeah, the turn played out exactly as you expected.
Yeah, absolutely, and having Bruno, this helps a little because Bruno, as we mentioned before, has that Water Ogre Pond to kind of deal with the Heatran just damage-wise, but also playing the sleep game with Rahim's Pokemon and just putting them to sleep and forcing Rahim to position around and get rid of this Amoonguss and focus it down. I think it's really interesting. Amoonguss is a Pokemon. You don't always have to be making Rage Powder. It redirects Pokemon to it in other ways by just offering so much Spore pressure that you're kind of forced to target it down if you don't want to get put to sleep.
Yep, not getting put to sleep is exactly what Rahim is focusing on, protecting the Heatran, and Bruno also protecting the Amoonguss, respecting the potential Heat Wave coming out from the Heatran, and we see the turn being ended with Iron Hands attacking into the Heatran. So, yeah, just another turn for Amoonguss to get a potential sleep in.
I think it is also important to note, while Rahim does stall out these sleep turns, the Landorus will be getting a boosted Stomping Tantrum if it does wake up here, as we saw it locked in. And it is going to be the Ogre Pawn, so even though it is a resisted hit, the Stomping Tantrum, having that double boosted power, is still going to do a decent chunk into this Ogre Pawn.
Yep, well, Bruno trying to mitigate that damage as much as possible, bringing in Pokemon that can resist the Stomping Tantrum, as Rahim rationalizes the Heatran, wanting to take less damage from Iron Hands' Drain Punch. But we see the Landorus taking a turn of sleep, so not getting its first turn of waking up. But we see some Pokemon dodging the Heat Wave. It's the Iron Hands, which is pretty big. We see the burn, very, very relevant over on the Ogre Pawn. And with the Heatran taking the Life Orb chip and the Wild Charge damage, took about half of its health for its troubles, but got a pretty good payoff, if I would say so.
Yeah, absolutely. The intimidation from Rahim paying dividends. Even though you didn't hit the Heat Wave on the Iron Hands, I think you're more than happy with the burn on Ogre Pawn, especially with the Heat Wave getting it to about 50%. Not even needing necessarily Sunny Day, just letting the burn chip kind of do its job. And if you're in Rahim's position now, you're just waiting for this Landorus to wake up and do super effective damage to the Iron Hands.
Yeah, pretty interesting turn where Bruno might want to, unclear whether they want to follow me because it's not guaranteed whether this Landorus would wake up this turn. But we see Bruno not wanting to take the risk at all, switching out their Iron Hands to the Landorus, dropping an Intimidate, but also relevantly wanting to dodge a Stomping Tantrum that is boosted in damage. And we see the Heatran going for wanting to not risk any more damage from the Wild Charge. And Landorus looks like it wakes up, goes for the Stomping Tantrum, this being whisked by the Iron Hands, switching out for the Landorus. And we see the turn being ended with the Ogre Pawn attacking into the Heatran.
Yeah, and I think for Bruno's end there, I would have liked to see something like Ivy Cudgel, maybe into something like the Landorus, because the Heatran, you can deal with, because the Iron Hands did dodge that Heat Wave. You know that after the Intimidate and a Life Orb recoil, you most likely would take it down with another Wild Charge, and without something like the Landorus on Rahim's end into, that's a pretty safe play from Bruno's end. And if Ogre Pawn, even though it's burned, if you're able to get something like a critical hit and just do lots of damage into this Landorus, you can get it into maybe something like Heavy Slam range, or have it, be a lot more pressured by other Pokemon in your team.
Yep, so looks like Rahim came out unscathed that turn, and we'll see what kind of Pokemon they decide to switch in, given this Landorus is actually threatening a lot of damage now, and Rahim's is not, on the other hand, which he recognizes, so he switches out his Landorus for the Urshifu, wanting to take maybe an Ivy Cudgel a little bit more handily, especially thanks to the burn. But we see Rahim actually go for the double switch, so it's a rotating Dora Pokemon with the Tortoise ready to get the Tailwind up.
Yeah, and Bruno actually going for a Stomping Tantrum and doubling into that Heatran slot and realizing just very threatened from it game one. Getting the switch into that Stomping Tantrum is really, really big, and getting your Urshifu in for essentially free here now, you're able to just go for Tailwind, Wicked Blow into things. And even though if Iron Hands does switch in here, you're still doing chip damage to it so that your Heatran can finish off in the late game. But this is just so much pressure from Rahim's end, and it's kind of how we talked about in team preview. This Choice Band Urshifu, even if it's not one-shotting things, which I would be surprised if it didn't one-shot the Landorus, even if it doesn't, it's doing so much damage, and it's just essential to the team.
Yep, and now this Ogre Pawn is kind of stuck in a weird space where it either has to sacrifice itself with the Follow Me or just be ignored for a long time thanks to its burn. So we see that it goes for the former, going for the Follow Me, saying, okay, with the burn, I don't think I'm as much use anymore. Let me let this Landorus get at least one attack off onto this Urshifu, get into more range of a Drain Punch from the Iron Hands, for example. But we see this Urshifu actually, maybe calling that Follow Me, going for a U-turn, getting that super effective damage and knocking it out while also being repositioned and getting a Pokemon in that wants to take the Stomping Tantrum like this Landorus.
And I think that play was also super smart for him, recognizing the fact that Stomping Tantrum would actually be boosted power because it missed into the Tornadus last turn. So maybe like a critical hit Stomping Tantrum boost might have killed the Urshifu. Rahim recognizing that and switching out into the Landorus to guarantee, I'm not going to let you do damage to any of my Pokemon.
So a lot of very good positioning and pivoting over from Rahim's end while still being able to dish out damage, which is pretty cool. So now we see the Iron Hands coming out from Bruno's end, ready to get a fake out in and maybe get Bruno back into the game a bit more.
Yeah, and I think something like the fake out into Landorus is a little obvious here, and even a switch from the Bruno's Landorus, considering it literally cannot do anything unless it wants to stay in and try to read maybe a cheeky switch that Rahim wants to go for. But I think Rahim is fine with getting faked out because the other slot gets to do something. So you're either getting a Tailwind up this turn or you're getting Stomping Tantrum into the Iron Hands here.
Well, it seems like Bruno's not really willing to make those kind of reads of Rahim switching out, so switches into the Amoonguss, able to take those Stomping Tantrums probably a lot better. But we see the Terrestrial coming out over from Bruno's end onto the Iron Hands, rather into the Water type to reduce the damage from the Stomping Tantrum and hopefully deal back a lot more in return. So yeah, we see the fake out coming out to Tornadus actually having the Mental Herb item instead of the Covert Cloak, so actually able to be flinched instead. So yeah, good call to not double the Stomping Tantrum damage again.
Yeah, and Rahim now has to make a choice because while you do have Protect on the Tornadus, you don't have Taunt. Something that the Covert Cloak set benefits a lot more from. So something like this Amoonguss is staring you down, and if a Lander switches in for the Iron Hand slot, I'm not sure you're going to be able to pick up a KO on the Amoonguss, and it can get another Spore off.
Yep, so we see Bruno really transitioning game plans in this set, trying to go for more Spores with the Amoonguss, which is one of the last two Mons left, and seems like it's pretty free, like you said, to get those Spores off. So will he be able to make it count and still have the Iron Hands outlive Rahim's Pokemon? But we see the switch out coming out from Iron Hands on Bruno's end, switching to the Landorus, trying to take another Stomping Tantrum and drop another Intimidate onto the Landorus, which clearly stayed in this turn. And we see Protect coming out from the Tornadus, maybe reading that the Spore might come into that slot instead. And the Stomping Tantrum whizzs into the Landorus, something we've seen a lot this match for some reason. And then finally the Spore goes into Tornadus, well read by Rahim.
Yeah, and I think that this is still a really difficult position for Rahim to get into because you don't have something like the Protect on the Lander. So the Spore, especially now that you've protected on the Tornadus, the Spore can go off into either slot, and there's not much counterplay Rahim really has. Leaving Rillaboom and Ogerpon at home, you don't have a Spore immunity at all, not even in your Terastallization choices. So it's really, really difficult for Rahim to kind of get away from Spore. So you just kind of have to take it and hope you don't get 3 turns slept. Bruno here, it's kind of up to them which slot they want to Spore. I think something like the Tornadus was the correct call from the last turn, so they don't get necessarily Bleak Wind, but we are going to see a Stomping Tantrum from Amoonguss with that double base power. Oh, yep. Wow.
Oh, we actually see the knockout over from Rahim's end, so really clever with the use of the double power on the Stomping Tantrum. Being able to knock out the Amoonguss without proccing the Citrus Berry, just barely missing out, being above 50%. And yeah, I'm not sure if either of us really saw that coming, but that was definitely the amount of damage that Rahim needed to make that turn.
Yeah, they're two perfect rolls because I think with any little bit more or any bit less, would have either procced the Citrus Berry or allowed it to live a Bleak Wind Storm. Considering Rahim's Tornado seems to be a little bit more bulky. So I wasn't really expecting for Bleak Wind to kill there, but having picked up that KO on the Amoonguss, getting rid of your main threat allows you to just click damage buttons now, and with the Ogerpon and Amoonguss being gone, your two main forms of redirection, this Landorus is allowed to just click Stomping Tantrum or switch out and pivot that, cycle that Intimidate on these two physical attackers on Bruno's end.
Yep, Rahim is doing exactly that, wanting to cycle out the Intimidate, maybe even reset its move selection. As Tornadus goes for the Protect, not wanting to take a Fake Out, not wanting to take a Rock Slide. We see the Fake Out going into the Heatran, wanting to, not take another Stomping Tantrum. And we see the turn end with the Landorus going for the Rock Slide and getting a pretty big critical hit on the Heatran. So now we might be able to see a double KO, depending on how fast this Landorus is in relation to the Heatran.
Yeah, and the critical hit there, not really mattering, not even KOing the Heatran. I really like Rahim's decision here to go for something as consistent as Tailwind Flash Cannon. There's no reason to go for a Heat Wave into the Iron Hands and fish for a burn or just chip it. You know now that it's Terastallized that it's going to be taking neutral damage from that Choice Bandit Wicked Blow Urshifu you have in the back. Something like the Flash Cannon with that Life Orb is able to just pick up the KO on that Landorus and Tornadus. It doesn't really matter what gets KO'd now. You just have so much damage in this Iron Hands, and with Drain Punch into a Landorus and a Tornadus isn't going to be healing you back much either. And I do believe Rahim should be able to take this game pretty cleanly.
Yep, Iron Hand's known to have pretty incredible stats, but maybe not incredible enough to do a 3v1 like in this situation. So, like you said, I think Rahim just needs to click the damaging buttons, and I don't know if this Iron Hand's gonna recover its health fast enough, having a bad matchup against this Landorus to begin with. So, see a Stomping Tantrum going in, along with the Bleak Windstorm, even being a single target attack boosted, it's still just not doing the requisite damage to get the knockout. So, I think we'll see this game be prolonged one more turn before the final blow from Urshifu goes in, as we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this was a really, really well-played game from Rahim. Just positioning and Protect on Tornadus that we mentioned before, paying dividends in that second game. We kind of talked about it as well. The Amoonguss really being kind of Bruno's game plan. Not allowing it to get any important spores into the Tornadus and Bleak Wind plus Stomping damage calc that we saw was super, super big for Rahim.
Yep. Yeah, I think this